characteristically non-professional and non-market forces. Now this is something which you need to remember. They were clustered in certain subjects which were called the feminine subjects, and these kind of subjects were non-professional subjects as we see now there was leadership, and they were non-partisan subjects. That is, there was less employability because of clustering in those subjects. Now the state funding and the basic philosophy processing higher education was that education is a crucial factor for social change and social mobility. Now the pressures for change emanating from globalization came when the higher education system was unable to meet the rising social demand for professional education. So with globalization, there came in the demand for professional education, for professional disciplines, professional subjects, and that is something which the state-funded institutions, the universities, were unable to meet. Therefore, globalization has meant privatization and increased individual cost of higher education. This is what we are going to look at. How women have been affected by the increasing individual cost and the change in the subject options offered by the higher education. Now, in case of, I must talk about the various authors who have been really working on these issues. One is Professor Karuna Chananan. She has written extensively on women's higher participation in higher education. And there are other authors like Clark and Marlinson and Bachi who have worked extensively on the global higher education part. So, what we find is that the relationship between the government and the universities have been changing all over the world. Some of the features that characterize this change are firstly, reduction in government funding, which I already spoke about, and the pressure on the universities to raise funds from the industry, from the market, and from the individual students. Because otherwise they will not be able to meet the demand, which is the social demand which are being met, which are being followed. So what was the result of this? So the universities were forced to downsize. Now all these changes have an impact on the personal equity issues within the university. Remember we talked about the university being an agent of social change and social mobility. So both the sectors were equally they could be equally trained, they could receive equal education from the state-funded institution. But now, this had an impact on the equity issues within the universities because of commitment within courts, a commitment of equity and a commitment to cost cutting, which is being referred to by Bakshi in 2001, may not go hand in hand. As we have seen in many public spheres, that welfare objectives and the commercial objectives which have been imposed upon that particular sector, they do not go hand in hand. You either concentrate on the welfare objectives or you go further for the commercial gain. There is also a conflict between the traditional image that we have seen for the university as a place where there is a pursuit of scholarship, mere pursuit of scholarship, it was the main aim, and the new image of a corporate university, which the private universities are providing. Now, this conflict is nothing new actually. We find this in the emerging democracies even in the 20th century, where the universities are expected to work earlier. The universities were expected to work on social issues and concerns instead of being just creators of knowledge. So now this has been changed. Now the professionalism, the accountability and everything taken a former seat, a front seat, and the university as an agent of social change and social mobility has taken a back seat. Now some of the critical implications of globalization are, first of all, the change in the stratification of the discipline. There has been a distinct division in the subject in terms of science and in terms of art. Okay? Now this is being replaced by an increase in the applied or the professional subjects And the private sector has been a real critical player because they have been they are very quick to respond to such demands of professional courses because they do not lack in funding. They have the private funding. Moreover, globalization is also accompanied by an increased focus on techno-sciences, which have gender implications. Because what we find right from independence, in fact, when we look at the statistics, when we look at the higher education statistics, we find that women are less likely to be involved in those areas which are the front runners in the new economy in the market. They are most likely to be at a lower level, and they may also be unable to adjust to the time-space compression which the professional forces are now demanding. And the most important example is the IT sector. Now, what are the implications for women who are part of the gender system of higher education? Globalization has changed the world into a global market, and the direct nexus between the industry, the corporate world, and higher education has brought a transformation in the skills needed for the job. Therefore, if you are going to apply for the job as an IT professional, you need to have an IT as your discipline when you are studying. Okay. Now, if you want to have very professional courses, which I'll come to in a short while from now, certain professional courses, you need to have a degree with it. So, there has been a demand to have the skill orientation, to have in order to apply for such job, and therefore there has been a shift from a normal or a traditional subject that we have been studying to a transformation to a skill-oriented professional courses. There has been a corresponding change in the boundary between arts and science. Now, there has been a stratification. We know that there are certain art subjects which includes the humanities, the social sciences, the languages, everything. On the other hand, in the science subjects, we have the natural or the pure sciences. Now, what we find, which is a little unfortunate, but at the same time, we need to also welcome the other subjects or take into account the other subjects which are being now put forward in the courses, and we have to keep at par with the other countries also. Find that the natural or the pure sciences have been relegated to a lower position, and where we find that the applied or the professional courses are taking the front seat or in the upper rungs of the ladder. Again, the academic courses relating to biosciences, because that is the most significant changes that we can observe. In case of related biosciences, we find subjects like molecular biology, microbiology, biochemistry, biophysics, they are preferred over biology. Preferred over biology, they are preferred over physics, they are preferred over chemistry. So these are the modern professional subjects which are being now offered by institutions, higher education institutions. Now, in this hierarchy of disciplines, new disciplines also have emerged. They have like management courses, which is very popular in MBA courses, the media and the mass communication, fashion technology, food technology. I mean, you make whatever is there being offered to you, and these have come up, and these are the professional courses where the employability is much higher, and therefore these there is a trend of replacing where both the men and women actually are drawn towards this subject if they can actually afford it. So these are basically self-financed courses, and they now belong to the higher end of the spectrum if you look at the subject. And the private institutions, as I talked about this earlier, that they are very quick to respond to this because they have enough funding to use this. Because at this point, it's because in order to provide these courses, you need to have the proper or the right infrastructure. If you do not have that, the traditional universities, because of lack of funding, they do not have the adequate infrastructure to provide these courses. But the private sector or private universities can be the same. Moreover, the new developments have led to the devaluation of the subjects in humanities and the social sciences. Women, now as I pointed out earlier, women used to enter colleges and universities mainly in general education or in arts, humanities and social sciences, even in the early 1990s. But later on, a trend which is still continuing, but we do see a shift from these kind of traditional subjects to professional subjects. However, they are also entering the professional subjects offered in the public institutions because of the lack of funding, because women, I'm not talking about women in that sense of the term, but in a middle class family and lower middle class families, they cannot afford to provide their children with the professional courses, to send them to study the professional courses, and therefore they are joining such professional courses only when they are being offered by the public institutions like Northern University and other university and these kind of institutions. Simultaneously, they are also entering the private self-financing institutions for pursuing their studies in both the new and the traditionally labeled masculinity. Now, the gendered impact of these changes requires attention if the goal of social change and gender equity has to be achieved. So the study, as Thomas has pointed out, Thomas Aquinas has pointed out, the study of gender in effect is a study of inequality. So what we also notice is that whether in certain subjects, still even in the professional subjects, if the ward's parents can really afford it, or if you can get an education in both, whether there is still gender inequality present in the professional courses. Now, from the feminist sociological perspective, on a women's educational experience, there are several dimensions which have been highlighted. Firstly, their underparticipation. Second, their underachievement. And third, their underrepresentation. Now, this has been pointed out by Megally in 1924. So, this is because of the sex role socialization and stereotyping of the feminine role and its impact upon the girls' educational situation. So, when we find that there is a segregation of girls into humanities and art, and boys into science at the school level, so sociologists contended that this imbalance in subjects had to be repressed to remove the inequality which is present in the education system. It was also emphasized that not only should more girls enroll in science in school, they must also do well. So the basic argument is that girls tend to opt for specific subjects because of their socialization, which relates feminine roles to feminine subjects. And in India, we find that the decision to make science compulsory till class 10 was basically to ensure that all girls will read science till class 10 at least, and then opt for science if they have the interest in that. So additionally, subject choice and its relationship to gender in higher education also received attention. It is argued that the clustering of women in specific subjects leads to their occupational segregation later in life. Obviously, if you are concentrating on certain subjects in arts and humanities only, so if you want to progress into some kind of an occupation, some kind of profession, you are going to have a particular occupation in mind. Like for example, we see concentration of women as primary teachers, concentration of women in the teaching profession, concentration of women in nursing and other sectors. But post-globalization also, there has been an opening of new opportunities, but let us see where these opportunities lie further. We'll find that. Therefore, one should try to understand why certain subjects have become associated with women and others with men. Now, interestingly, when we find that when we differentiate between women in the arts and science subjects, and we find more number of male students who are attending who have taken up the science subject. Now, it is not because it refers rather the science subject, but it is termed as the masculine subject. So, the social differentiation or the socialization part plays a very, very important role in this regard, in this differentiation between women clustering into the arts and humanities and the men flocking into the science subjects. Now, there is another aspect which I would like to highlight, where we find, just give me a minute. Seeing a lot of reports, Committee on the Education of Women in 1959, Committee on the Status of Women in 1974, we have the CEDAW, we have the World Conferences on Women, where the women's agenda has been placed, but then a lot remains to be achieved. So, since 1991, the policies of the government have dramatically changed the seemingly privileged position of higher education. The government began to talk of removing public support to higher education and to make it self-financing while privatizing. Higher education has also become a non-merit course. Those who are in the economic stream will understand why education and health is considered to be merit course. Now it is not considered to be a merit course, it has become a non-merit course. So it does not require government funding. The link of the universities with the private sector is not new in India, nor is the nexus between higher education and labor. What is disconcerting is the nature and speed of change. The motives of those who are establishing the private institutions, the ad hoc approach to the new development, and the lack of a considered response from the Indian government. Now, while they were affiliated to the universities of the region and were regulated by their statutes, like we have our own statutes, they were also notorious, these private institutions, and notorious for charging a huge amount of money. Don't forget the capitation fee issue which was there in the earlier new millennium, and there was a huge uproar regarding this. And therefore, the tuition fees etc. are fixed by the university, but not by the government. It's not regulated by the government. So they remained limited in number, and therefore did not. The capitation fees, because it was limited in number, it could not attend the system, but still there was a huge uproar because of the exorbitant fees that were being raised by these private institutions. Anyway, so what we find in spite of these institutions, while they are levying very, very high fees, it is very difficult when we look at the socialization process, that it will be from a family side, it will be, if you want to be an engineer, if you want to go into other professional courses now, and it will be always the male child which is going to be, which gets the preference, like the son preference, rather than the girl child. But these things have changed over the period of time, and the new millennium has seen a lot of difference, a lot of changes. Now, the programs in higher education are divided into groups of general subjects, which such as arts, and which include social sciences and humanities, and pure sciences on the one hand, and the professional courses such as engineering, includes architecture, medical science, teacher education, agriculture, law, etc. on the other side. Now, they are also divided as masculine and feminine disciplines. For example, arts and social sciences, humanities, teacher education have been viewed as feminine disciplines. And on the other hand, commerce, law, engineering are masculine disciplines. Now, medical science has not been a masculine discipline, for one. Because in case of India, unlike in the Western countries, because in India, as in rest of South Asia, the practice of female seclusion enjoins the treatment of women patients by women doctors, and therefore the medical profession remained untouched. Okay? This necessitated the training of women doctors, thereby enabling women to enter the medical profession, as Charana rightly pointed out. The proportion of women in some of the masculine disciplines was minuscule, and soon after independence, and remained so till the 1980s. But later on, we find a large number of students making an exodus from the arts and humanities stream to the science to the modern professional forces when the family is put up. Okay. So this is what I would like to comment on. And nowadays we also find that the research in natural sciences is not preferred by men because it does not lead to high salaried professions. Okay. Now it also requires several more years than an engineering or IT or a management degree before a job. Thus, more women are now staying on to do research in natural sciences, as pointed out by Bala in 2004, and to fill up the space created by the men. Therefore, the percentage distribution of women and men have almost become equal in sciences over the last one decade. Okay? And prior to the 1990s, that is education and its linkage to the job market early on in life was only for those men who needed jobs and was certainly not for women. Okay? These days, young women and men like to earn as soon as they can. After school also they want to earn. Okay? The revolution in values cuts across all the upper and the middle strata of society who want to begin earning as soon as possible. The daughters of city-based professional parents, especially if they do not have brothers, have really undergone a sea change in their social education. The parents are giving the best education to their daughters and expect them to be independent and follow parents. No doubt, they are in the minority, especially at the macro level. Now, in this changed situation, the priorities of women have also changed. They too want professional education and are therefore entering the so-called masculine business. Now, this point is to be noticed because this is related to the employment sector also. This can be better understood if you look at the percentage distribution of women, which I cannot show you right now. But if you look at the data, you will find that there are a large number of women now who are entering into these professional courses and pursuing careers in their lives. Whether in case of the upper strata it is related to the marriage issues, or they really want to opt for a career and then settle down, that remains to be seen. Okay. Let us look at the employment part. Now, the impact of international trade on women's employment has been a core issue, where major studies have been done. Now, similarly, the fallout of globalization is leading to casualization, marginalization of the gender and stereotyping of unnoticeable in various spheres of employment. Now, whereas we do find that globalization has been intimately related to economic empowerment by providing employment opportunities and prompting governments to design major schemes and programs to empower women, the issue of gender inequality and gender disparity still remains a major area of concern. Now, globalization has led to an increased demand for labor. Now, this is a very important point. That where the students and the teachers who are teaching economics, they will be in the know that globalization has increased the labor demand. And India being a labor abundant country, so the cheap labor was provided to the MNCs, which we all know. Now, the special economic zones were set up in order to facilitate the multinationals also. However, little attention was given to the nature of work, the kind of work which was being provided, their wages, and the nature of exploitation to both men and women, and especially for women. Now, India, like we know, that there's an abundant supply of unskilled and semi-skilled workers. But at the same time, India also has a significant proportion of skilled workers compared to most of Latin America and Africa. Therefore, it is expected that the impact of the international trade will be employment creation, both for semi-skilled and unskilled workers, and also in the skilled sector, especially in the skilled for the skilled workers. Again, financial liberalization, which ensured the capital flow to the country, also bring about the large number of the impact of it can change the nature and length of employment which is to be generated within the region. The basic choice of foreign investment also directs the choice of employment or the type of labor which is required. Like we talked about the universities, we can talk think in terms of the health sector, where we find a lot of private health service providers are there, and therefore their choice or their type of workers, the kind of workers, salaried workers which they require, they need a typical professional experiences for which and which can lead to their placements in these kind of private sector units. Okay. And thus the labor abundant country has to gear up for a change in the capital intensity. That is, we are looking for labor or we are trying to hire workers which are skilled, who are skilled in professions and all that. But this acquisition of skills requires a capital. And that is where there is a differentiation or a transformation from a labor-intensive economy to a gradual shift to a capital intensive. So now within India, in case of India, the structural adjustment programs were implemented to ensure growth of aggregated wealth. But the imbalance between the capital intensity, which I just talked about, that is labor and capital, shows a lowering of this growth in aggregated wealth. So globalization has led to opportunities, led to opening up of opportunities, but we find that there has been a regressive state where we find that the aggregate employment is actually getting its decline. The rate has fallen in major sectors, including agriculture, manufacturing, and however, the growth rate has increased. The rate has increased in construction, in transport, and in services. Now, another impact of the increasing exports in countries like India has been that there has been an increased demand for female workers. Now, a very strong example which we always cite when we talk about women in these kind of export processing zone, export sector, is the Bangladesh garment factory, where we find large number of women are being employed out there, but one aspect is the newspaper. They are working as piece-rated workers. So they are gig workers. Once you have the project, you are working out there and you are getting a piece rate. Similar conditions you can see in our right at hand in the tea sector, in the tea gardens or the tea plantations, where we find women who are pluckers. They are piece-rated workers, as against the supervisors or the men who are in the higher ups or in the tea industry, where they are salaried. So this is the difference. So it is not that the piece-rated workers, it is not that the kind of exploitation that women have been subjected to. It is nothing new. We have already noticed that because tea is a commodity which is a global commodity. So all these things, all the features that we are talking about in case of renewable employment are in the post-globalization period, but the nature and the condition of the something that we already experienced, that we've seen in the tea sector. What we find is that in case of women, there has been a change in the opportunities that have been given. We find that there has been a lot of women who are, right now I talked about there has been a fall in employment in agriculture and manufacturing. We also find another feature, something that is new, something we had talked about earlier, that there has been feminization of agriculture, because we find a lot of women working in agriculture, not only as family labor but also as agricultural laborers because of the economic pressure. But now, because of the because the returns for agriculture are diminishing, or rather it does not compensate, or it's not commensurate with the lifestyle or the urban lure which they face. So there have been many families who are actually migrating. So migration is one option which they are adopting, and therefore we find there are families who are selling off their land, or if they don't have land or they do not have any assets, they are migrating to the nearby urban areas. Now, there has been a rampant urbanization in India over the last 2 or 3 decades. Okay, if you look at the figures, if you look at the census towns and everything, you will find that the census towns have grown into urban centers. Okay, and we find that there has been migration for jobs, and either there has been single migration, where the men migrate, or they migrate with their families. Now, this has resulted in defeminization of agriculture. Okay? This is one important point where in the post-globalization period. And there has been feminization of the tertiary or the service sector, tertiary or the service sector, and in the manufacturing sector, especially in case of piece-rated workers. And there has been a spectacular growth in the IT, in the electronics, and in the telecommunications sector, where women are being employed. There are two sides of it. One is the service provided, where we find large number of domestic helps. We find small entrepreneurs coming up, women entrepreneurs coming up. We also have the sex workers who are service provided. But also we find they are providing services as hairdressers, as masseurs, and in the hospital sector, in the hospitality sector, we find a lot of women are being engaged in these service sectors. But they are always in the lower round of the sector, okay, not in the higher one. And we must also point out that if you look at the informal and the formal sector, we find that the informal sector engages 94. The workers, the percentage of workers, women workers is 94% in the informal sector, which includes the domestic helps, the small entrepreneurs who are producing something and going and selling in the market, these kind of small masseurs who go from houses to houses, and these kind of activities are there, who are actually now these domestic helps. They have increased in number because there is a migration from agriculture to the urban centers, and the high-rise buildings which are coming up at the drop of a hat. You find that the families who are residing there, and in the peri-urban centers, these women can come and work out there. So there has been a constant increase in the demand for the domestic helps, and they are basically the unskilled workers. Okay? So the semi-skilled workers, they have different service conditions, and they go into such sectors, and like the hairdressing, they have to take a training for masseurs, and for hospitality in the hotels, and even in the hospitals and the clinics that are there. So there has been a constant demand, and I would like to end by pointing out what globalization, even though there has been a disproportionate impact of globalization of both men and women. The final word I will talk about the IT sector, where we find a large number of women being employed out there. Now, we had raised a concern while talking about education, that these kind of professional courses and the professional the opportunities which are being provided to both men and women. Now, it will be very difficult for them to compress the time constraints. There can be space constraints, there can be mobility constraints for which the women might not be able to take up these kind of opportunities. But we have been proved wrong. We see that large number of women have joined the IT sector with the security provided by the company itself, these kind of professional courses. Now, why women, why middle class families are actually going for this? Going for this because spite of the son preference, in spite of the differentiation in provisions given to both the girl child and the boy child. Now the middle class, especially in the urban middle class, they are finding that especially the girls, they want to go pursue a career, and what best is that is to get a computer education, you get an IT education, techno-based education, and you join this sector. Now, why the families are also affording this kind of service, this kind of support they are giving to their daughters is particularly because this has some kind of a social value, kind of a status. It upgrades the status when you talk about, if in case of both males and females, when you talk about, oh, my son is in the IBM, my son is in the PCS. So similarly, in the job market, in the marriage market, all this has upgraded the middle class family. I mean, they want their daughters, especially in case of a single child or a single daughter, that they want their child to at least pursue a career in these kind of IT services where they find it. The BPOs, the call centers, everywhere you will find that the women are dominating, and that is primarily because the middle class families or the upper class families, they are now realizing that there is a social status upgradation where the daughters are actually pursuing such careers. So I'll end with this. There is a lot of, over the years, we find that in the recent years there has been a lot of talk about the decline in the women's labor force participation, which is happening both in the rural and in the urban sectors, but that requires a full lot of explanation, which is also a fallout of the globalization factor. Okay, I think I've overshot the time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Srimati ma'am ke. Srimati ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful sessions. I would like to invite questions now. If anyone has any question, you are free to ask, ma'am. No questions. So thank you, ma'am, for this insightful session. I would like.
Thank you so much. Actually, I also want to point out that in the post-COVID situation, there has been a lot of changes in the stereotype of roles. Sometimes we also notice role reversals between men and women in the employment sector. Anyway, that is another issue which we can talk about later. Thank you so much.
Surely, ma'am, we'll meet again. So now we'll break for lunch. I would like to invite everybody to join us for lunch in room number 4, and we'll resume the session after an hour at 3 p.m.